U.S. commitment to Ukraine a central question as Biden meets with EU. Washington, AP. Saddled with a dysfunctional Congress, President Joe Biden has the task of assuring European Union leaders on Friday that the United States can nonetheless deliver on promises to send tens of billions of dollars worth of aid to wartime Ukraine and Israel. The Oval Office sit-down comes at a moment when domestic U.S. political chaos could further destabilize an increasingly chaotic world. Many of Biden's shared priorities with the EU depend on getting a budget through Congress, a tough task given that the House lacks an elected speaker and differences with some Republican lawmakers over aid for Ukraine could force a federal government shutdown in November. Along with addressing Ukraine's efforts to repel Russia and the fallout from Hamas' attack on Israel, the US and EU leaders are also figuring out how to manage climate change, economic competition with China and trade and tax issues. One day ahead of his meeting with Biden, European Council President Charles Michel expressed optimism that Biden can deliver on his promises to help arm and financially support Ukraine. "I'm really confident and also I'm grateful for Joe Biden's personal leadership," Michel said. "He will do everything to ensure this support will be confirmed." The U.S. president has cultivated a personal relationship with Michel and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who calls Biden, "Dear Joe." President Joe Biden speaks from the Oval Office of the White House Thursday, October 19, 2023, in Washington, about the war in Israel and Ukraine. Jonathan Ernst, Pool via AP. Both the EU and US pride themselves for being devoted to democratic principles, a source of unity as they navigate Russia's war in Ukraine and the war between Israel and Hamas. They have framed their support for Israel as a reflection of shared democratic values and stressed the importance of following international law in military operations. But the reality of democracies is that foreign policy agreements can change with elections and competing interests at home can overshadow diplomacy. The two partners still have differences to reconcile on trade, economic matters and the incentives for shifting to renewable energy sources. The US and EU still need to finalize an agreement on environmentally sustainable steel and aluminum production in order to avoid the tariffs imposed during Donald Trump's presidency. Biden's own incentives on moving away from fossil fuels have left Europe a little bit uncomfortable, said Federico Steinberg, a visiting fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington-based think tank. While the EU welcomes US efforts to accelerate the green transition, Steinberg said, some elements of Biden's programs are protectionist in nature, discriminate against trade partners and undermine the World Trade Organization system that the EU would like to revive. But for now, the US and EU are focused on the big challenges of war and solidarity in their words and policy choices. Von der Leyen said Thursday that the core of the Oval Office conversation will be about Ukraine and Israel. Time equals 400 ms greater than. The winds are not just blowing today they are gale force, she said in remarks at the conservative Hudson Institute. Our democracies are under sustained and systemic attack by those who abhor freedom. In addition to sanctioning Russia, EU countries have provided close to $90 billion in assistance to Ukraine, including $27 billion in military aid, von der Leyen said. But there are open questions as to whether the U.S. commitment could waver after having provided 4 rounds of aid to Ukraine that total $113 billion, a sum that includes replacing U.S. military equipment sent to Kyiv. Now is the time to double down, von der Leyen said Thursday. In a separate interview with the Associated Press, Michel said the US and EU would still need to make progress on addressing the steel tariffs and defending the interests of European businesses. But Michel said both parties are aligned on Ukraine, and Europe is doing what's needed and we are preparing the next decisions to mobilize more and more funding, more military equipment for Ukraine and for the Ukrainians. Biden is expected to ask for $105 billion in additional funding Friday, including $60 billion for Ukraine, much of which would replenish U.S. weapons stockpiles provided earlier. Time equals 400 ms greater than. There's also $14 billion for Israel, $10 billion for unspecified humanitarian efforts, $14 billion for managing the U.S.-Mexico border and fighting fentanyl trafficking, and $7 billion for the Indo-Pacific region, which includes Taiwan. The proposal was described by three people familiar with the details who insisted on anonymity before the official announcement. Time equals 400 ms. greater than, but some House Republicans have questioned the value of aid to Ukraine at the levels sought by Biden. The GOP ousted Representative Kevin McCarthy, R. Califf, after a deal to temporarily keep the government open through November 17. Republican lawmakers have failed to find a successor, leading to concerns that Biden's commitments with the EU could be in jeopardy. The U.S. president offered his challenge to Congress in a Thursday evening speech by outlining the core idea behind his spending proposal. American values are what make us a partner that nations want to work with. We put all that at risk if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel. AP writer Raf Kassert contributed to this report from Brussels. President Joe Biden talks to reporters aboard Air Force One during a refueling stop in at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, Wednesday, October 18, 2023, as he travels back from Israel to Washington. AP photo, Evan Vucci.